Good evening, everyone. Gue Deluisi Trina, Elugwe, the University of King's College, Wedabexi Gluskap, Donagina Adegwemp. So hello, my name is Trina. I'm a member of the Gluskap First Nation, and I work here at King's, where I teach journalism, and I'm learning to speak Mi'kmaq. So King's is always great about doing land acknowledgements, but it's my honor tonight to welcome you here to Uktabuktuk, to King's, which sits on Mi'kma'ki, the unceded and ancestral territory of the Ulnug, the people, also called the Mi'kmaq. And so I welcome you here, Upjali Dach, Imsit Walalio. So welcome all, and thank you for coming. And now I'm going to head it to our director of the journalism school here, Fred Balance-Jones.
Well, good evening, and great to see so many of you here tonight. And I guess on behalf of the faculty, staff, and students of the University of King's College and the School of Journalism, Writing, and Publishing, I'm absolutely pleased to welcome you here. I'm just going to take a couple of seconds with this intro before passing things over to our host tonight. And when Pauline Dakin raised the idea earlier this year of hosting an event on this topic, I knew right away we just had to do this. I've personally watched over the years as access to the people we elect has tightened ever so slowly. It's been a little bit at a time, over my career, but the restrictions have kind of accumulated to this day, and it's very much different from when I began my journalism career on Parliament Hill in the early 1980s. So for some of you here, that's like prehistory. For others who are here, perhaps you remember some of the events. And one that I particularly remember was the day when the Prime Minister of the time, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, that's Trudeau Sr., father of the more recent Trudeau, he resigned for the second and final time in 1984. And we surrounded him in this chaotic scrum, and scrum is sort of a rugby word for a sort of wild interview where all the reporters surround somebody. You've seen it on TV. And we kind of went up the stairway, up from the House of Commons towards his office, kind of going along as he moved along. And from that emerged one of the most famous moments in Canadian politics that some of us of this vintage will remember. The story of the walk in the snow that heralded the end of an epic career. And I kind of look back and I say, I was there for that. That was cool. But anyway, journalists have those little memories. And such a scene seems almost unimaginable today. Here in Nova Scotia, for example, access to government officials has become more and more constrained over time. And the phrase, the minister was not available, has become common in news stories. And this is a problem. Canadian governments and the elected officials who lead them actually wield tremendous power in a democracy. They constantly are making choices that affect us all, such as how much to tax, how much to spend, and on what. Just yesterday, we saw that at the federal level. And journalists play this huge role in holding government officials accountable for those choices. It's really important. People have to know. And if they can't ask questions, don't have access, and must be content with written statements that are drained of any meaning, it's hard for them to do their job. Conversely, of course, with better access and the chance to query the powerful, the more they can help you, the public, cast votes that are informed by knowledge. So the question of how to fix this, of course, is why we're here tonight. And I'm really looking forward to the conversation, and I'd like to pass things over to our moderator for the evening, Professor Pauline Dakin.
She can take that one. Thank you, Fred. It is really encouraging to see how many people think that this is a conversation worth having. Thank you for being here this evening. Journalists in Nova Scotia and across the country and in a number of countries around the world are noting this increasing lack of communication and openness from governments. They say this because, as Fred has suggested, access to elected politicians and information has become more difficult. And some communications people, who are, of course, the gateway to politicians and government departments, see their job sometimes as protecting politicians from journalists, not facilitating access to them. Well, you might think, gee, these are busy people. Should they also have to take all these media calls? Well, here's the thing. Journalists are your stand-in. They have both the privilege and the responsibility to ask questions on behalf of citizens about policy, about how public money is spent, and sometimes about how or why things have gone wrong. Nova Scotia actually has a very long history of journalists holding power to account on behalf of citizens. In 1835, Haligonian Joseph Howe used his paper, The Nova Scotian, to criticize public policy and the magistrates who administered it. He spent time in a jail cell for that, but ultimately he was acquitted of criminal libel, and he was then kind of seen as, this was seen as the precedent for the freedom of the media, the freedom of journalism in Nova Scotia and in Canada. And Dr. Carrie Best, who was awarded an honorary doctorate of civil law at this university 3 decades ago, founded the Black newspaper in Nova Scotia, the second Black newspaper in Nova Scotia in 1947. It was called The Clarion. And in it, she exposed racism and explored the lives of Black Nova Scotians. And she broke the story of Viola Desmond and her struggle against segregation. And that was in her first issue. Today, our own Professor Trina Roach, who you just met, and I think of Maureen Gugu in Gugukwe's News, and they have told important stories about the Mi'kmaq Nation and the impacts and legacy of colonialism. But journalists are finding it harder all the time to tell important stories. The New York Times publisher and chairman A.G. Sulzberger spoke at the Investigative Reporters and Editors Awards in September, and he said, quote, "When journalists are kept from providing independent information to the public, it becomes far easier for those in power to act with impunity." And when we hear about politicians asking for support to bypass the media, that is essentially a request to avoid public scrutiny. This eminent panel has agreed to be here to talk about how governments and journalists interact and how that's evolving and how maybe we could improve that relationship. So let me introduce them to you. A lot of you will know Jean Larache, who spent 40 years at the CBC, 30 of them covering Province House in Nova Scotia. And the actions of 8 Nova Scotia premiers, including the current one. And he retired last spring, and as I was mentioning on social media today, he's no longer constrained by the journalistic standards of the CBC, so look out.
Be afraid, be very afraid.
At the far end of the table, Alex Marland is the Jaroslawski Chair in Trust and Political Leadership at Acadia University. He's an award-winning scholar of Canadian politics and a former public servant, as well as the author of Brand Command, Whipped, and most recently his brand new book, No I in Team, Party Loyalty in Canada. I'm just going to say that is so on topic, because it's all about crossing the floor. So, timely or what? His research explores how governments and parties manage information, enforce message discipline, and constrain elected representatives. And of course, you probably hear him from time to time in the media commenting on some of these things. And in the middle, Laura Lee Langley is president of the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency. And before joining ACOA, she served for 27 years in the Nova Scotia Public Service, most of the time in senior ranks. Since 2016, she served as Deputy Minister of the Office of the Nova Scotia Premier, Deputy Minister of Treasury Board, Clerk of the Executive Council, the Nova Scotia Public Service Commissioner and head of the Nova Scotia Public Service, and then CEO of Communications Nova Scotia. And I'm guessing that's where we'll hear about her experience there tonight. And prior to this, she led a number of departments in a deputy or associate deputy role. And even prior to that, some of you will remember her as an anchor and producer at ATV and then MITV, which is where we met. So welcome to you all, and thank you for being here. And I just wanted to let you know that last spring I invited the Premier to be here with us. His office referred the invitation to the Minister of Communications, Leah Martin, and I began having conversations with her office last May. I guess I thought it was important to have somebody within government to be part of the conversation. However, I'm sorry to say that her office was never able to suggest a date for which she would be available. So, thank you for being here. We will save some time for comments and questions at the end, and I'm looking at the King's journalism students, knowing they will have good questions. So let's begin. Jean, let's start with you. You were a specialist reporter covering the legislature. What was it like covering provincial governments and politics over the last 30 years?
Okay, so we've got 2 hours?
No. Yeah, edit yourself.
Well, at the beginning, it was easy to get the Premier, get cabinet ministers. If I wanted to talk to the Premier, who was John Savage at that time, I crossed the street from Province House, went up to the 7th floor of One Government Place and talked to the receptionist and said, does the Premier have a moment? 9 times out of 10, David Harrigan, who was the communications person at the time, would make time. I'd go in, I'd ask my 3-4 questions, say thank you very much, go across the street, do my work, and the Premier would get back to his work governing the province. And it was that simple. There was and I'm sure Laura Lee would remember, they published a booklet. It really was a directory of senior officials. And if you needed somebody, a subject matter expert, you had their phone number, you'd pick up the phone, you'd call them, they'd answer your questions, you'd be on your merry way. It was that simple. I know it seems kind of the halcyon days looking back, and every administration since then, whether they be Liberal, New Democrat, or Conservative, has further restricted or attempted to put barriers between reporters and the people they were hoping to cover. And some would call it an evolution. I would personally, as a former reporter, call it a devolution of the kind of accountability that Pauline talked about. I mean, we are there on the public's behalf, and we are asking the kind of questions we hope that people want us to be asking of their government. And over the years, it's been harder and harder and harder to get information, to get access to politicians. We no longer have weekly access to cabinet meetings because they don't hold cabinet meetings every week anymore. The last sitting I covered, it would have been the last one, the one that we just had, but the one that preceded it. The Premier's office had decided that we weren't going to be allowed to scrum in the People's House, Province House. We would have to go get ministers and the Premier across the street at One Government, and they would sit behind a podium and they would take their question. Well, that only changed because CBC, Canadian Press, and others said, we're not doing it. We tried the best we could to try and scrum ministers the same way we had been doing it, or I had been doing it for almost for 3 decades. And my buddy Michael Gorman, who's here, managed to kind of negotiate a détente where we were back at Province House, but in a more formal setting to be able to ask questions after question period. So the ground shifted considerably over my 30 years at Province House, and it has become much more difficult to get simple answers to simple questions. We get, as you say, one or two line paragraph statements from ministers that usually starts, "We care very deeply about insert problem here, and we are working the best of our ability to solve whatever issue is there." And in a lot of cases, we have very specific questions, and they simply don't get answered. So that's where we're at.
So, Laura-Lee, you're our insider tonight. And I just want to say, I think it's an incredibly courageous thing for somebody at your level to agree to come and be frank and honest about what you've seen. Mm-hmm. So thank you for that. So when you were in charge of communications Nova Scotia, what was the policy about how requests from journalists should be treated?
Thanks for the question, and I will say it's actually quite intimidating to be here, but I'm delighted to be here, and I do want to say that I think it's a very important conversation, and that's why I agreed to come. I think it's something that we have to talk about more. So to get to the question, Communications Nova Scotia was actually established in 1999, so it was a different time, for sure. But at the time, what we were trying to do was be a little more coordinated in government communications. And at the beginning, I think it worked fairly well. But I would say that our mandate or our mission was to tell Nova Scotians what their government was doing and why. And to be independent and transparent as possible. And in 1999, it was about providing more access because we had a very fractured system across the provincial government where we had at the time public information officers, they were called. They worked in various departments. They were all paid something different. They had various levels of expertise and background. And, we were becoming a little bit more sophisticated as a machine. So Communications Nova Scotia allowed us to bring things together like what will our policies and procedures be around how it is we provide transparent access. What is it that we will do when we look at how it is we market? How can we provide that independent arm's length support as a full service communications agency, but at the same time provide for Nova Scotians the information they need? So that's what the concept was in 1999. And I would say that I was lucky enough to be part of it, but it was not my vision. It was actually Jim Vibert, who many of you will know, who spearheaded the conception of Communications Nova Scotia, and those of us who worked in departments simply fell under the banner. But that was the concept of the day, and that was quite a long time ago. So things certainly have shifted.
So most recently, of course, the people in Communications Nova Scotia have been pulled back to the departments, and the independent agency is no more. What are you thinking about that?
Yeah, well, I have to say I have really mixed views about it because I feel like the pendulum swings. And what I think I saw over time was Communications Nova Scotia really became had great people, a lot of talent, a lot of great relationships with the folks in the media who I think, you tell me, worked around Province House. But it really became less of a strategic organization and more of an organization that was really taking orders and filling out templates and sheets. And I mean that with the greatest of respect to those who worked there. And so I saw more of a constriction in terms of how it is we were serving not only the government and the ministers and those who worked in government, but also Nova Scotians. And so I think something had to give there. I think they made choices, and I wasn't part of the conversations, but they made choices to put the communications folks back in departments, and I don't know how that's working out because I haven't really been paying much attention.
Terribly, from my experience.
Yeah.
But to be fair to CNS and to the vision that Laura-Lee has just espoused is that you have to it doesn't happen in a vacuum, and the consolidation of power at the center, be it the Prime Minister's office, the Premier's offices across the country, the trend has been there's greater and greater control coming from the handful or the dozens of people, depending on what you're talking about, who run the Premier's and the Prime Minister's office to keep their hand on tightly on information. And it's really the direction from the center that has created the changes that we have seen, the devolution over time.
Your word. I would say, along with the devolution or the evolution, whatever word you want to use, the news landscape, the media landscape, and the information landscape has changed tremendously. You know, back in 1999, we were barely using the internet. You know, we certainly didn't have smartphones. Palm Pilots were the greatest invention. I don't know if you remember them.
Blackberries.
Well, no, we had Palm Pilots first, and then we had these Blackberries. Yeah. And so, you know, I think really a lot of what's behind it is not losing control of the narrative and feeling as though you're going to lose control of the narrative with so many news channels happening. And I say that just as a reality. I'm not defending any approach. I'm just saying that when you're in this world where it's really difficult to make sure that when you're telling or sharing information with Nova Scotians about what their government is doing and why, that they're actually getting all of the information and contextually the information. And that's really difficult when you have a news hole that's shrinking every year. And, you know, when I was a reporter, the average story was 2 minutes long. Well, if you got 2 minutes today, man, it's a bonus. So anyway, I would just add that for context to say it's not really linear. There's a lot of complexity in why it changed, and I'm not defending it. I'm here because I think it's an important conversation, and I feel as though we have to be having it.
Agreed.
I want to bring Alex into the conversation here. Alex, in your new book, you're saying that party discipline has really come to include strict message control or discipline where politicians themselves don't feel free to speak frankly. What do you think that means for open and accessible government?
First of all, thank you everybody for coming. And if you're like me, it can be really depressing out there. and we're not trying to add to the depression. Hopefully at the end of tonight, you can walk away learning more and understanding more about how things work, but don't feel that the world is coming to an end. Media communications is constantly going in different patterns and cycles. It's just a very normal thing. There's been transformations before when television first came on the scene, radio came on the scene, when the printing press was developed, and society perseveres. So the research that I do involves talking to political strategists, politicians, political staff, journalists, public servants, and others, trying to understand right across the country, both provincially and federally, what goes on about the exchange of information between government and political parties and the public, and then intermediaries like journalists. And before I even get to how there's been an evolution from party discipline to party message discipline, I think it's useful to put ourselves in their shoes, to think about things from the point of view of politicians and the people at the center. And by the center, usually we mean in a premier's office or a prime minister's office, possibly a leader's office, surrounded by a bunch of staffers who are helping out and senior advisors. And immediately the word that comes to mind for me is risk. Risk to your reputation. Risk to everything that you are trying to accomplish. Risk to your political agenda. Risk to the fact that you have spent years getting ready for a policy announcement. And all of a sudden everything goes sideways because of something else. We saw that yesterday, in fact, with the budget. The announcement, all this time and effort put into the budget, and the finance minister's speech, etc. And then Chris D'Entremont was planning on changing political parties, but I can assure you he was not planning on doing it yesterday to throw everything amok. Things go out of control, and so you want to try to control them, but it's more than just control, it's in fact coordination. And the prism that I put on things is political parties increasingly, they use marketing techniques that they use and hone during election campaigns, and then they import those into when they form government. And a lot of that is branding. And when you think about a brand, what do you have to do to be a successful brand? You shrink big picture items into small messages that connect on an emotional level, and you repeat those messages over and over again. I had a cabinet minister once tell me, think about Tide detergent. We all know that Tide gets clothes clean. Why is that? It's because we keep hearing it over and over again. Does anybody ever actually test this or question it? So repetition is the key. I've had political strategists tell me, and ever since I look at it differently, look at the podium signs that are layered in front of somebody. Why do they have those podium signs? It's because they're concerned that journalists are going to take photographs and use the photograph for something else. But if you have a podium sign there, it's really hard to use the photo because you've got to use whatever the message is. More than that, I've been told about how strategists spend hours and hours and hours trying to shrink the number of words on the podium. So that if it's 5 words, how can they make it 4? And at the federal level, it's also got to go French as well. So next time you see Mark Carney, what are you going to see? You're going to see Canada Strong. It's a beautiful message for him, but it means everything is simplified and everything is reduced to that message. And then that gets us to party discipline evolving into message discipline. Because of the element of risk, of something going viral, of something throwing them off message, derailing everything, crisis communications, everything blowing up and being a complete catastrophe, it's much better to tell everybody, say the same thing, and say the same thing as the leader. That is safe. You will not get in trouble if you repeat what the leader is saying. So when I first started studying some of this, particularly when Stephen Harper was in office, I was noticing, and a lot of people were noticing, was how he was putting out messages of the day and how this was like journalists were freaking out about it. And the more people I interviewed, the more I realized those messages of the day aren't just about us as end consumers. The primary audience of these messages of the day are the caucus members, who are all checking their phones constantly, trying to figure out what is the leader doing today? Where is the leader? What is the leader saying? All right, that's my message box. And then behind the scenes, what we are not seeing, what journalists are not seeing, is parliamentarians are receiving messages in the morning on their phones, and they're saying, okay, overnight we've detected these are the stories, and I know I've had politicians show me these things. These are the stories that we are monitoring, or they start at 5 in the morning getting everything ready so they have an email ready to go out at 7 a.m. Here are the lead stories. Here's the key message. Here is the person who is the spokesperson. If the journalists call you on this, you refer them to that person. Everything is about coordination. And so what has happened is we used to be concerned about how in the legislature, everybody had to vote the party line, which is still the case. We're going to see that with the budget in Ottawa, that the expectation is if you're with this party, you have no agency to vote how you want. You're doing what you're told if you're part of this party. But it's more than that now. It's far more insidious because now it's what are you saying on social media? What is it you're saying in social forums? What are you saying in public forums like this? There was a time you could say something in your constituency, you could say something on the doorsteps, you could have a phone call, and you wouldn't worry about it being recorded and ended up all over the place. And so now people are even afraid to go out for lunch with each other if they're with somebody from the other side.
In fact, Alex, working in Quebec as a reporter, we'd often have federal politicians saying one thing in Quebec to a French audience and something else out west to an English audience. So they were tailoring those things. And pre-social media, English journalists outside of Quebec didn't read what French journalists were reporting on inside Quebec. There was much more a symbiotic relationship within Quebec. But yeah, so they were tailoring different messages and being able to say one thing to Quebecers, another thing to the rest of Canada.
Mm-hmm. This might be a good point to talk about social media and the impact that this has had on what we learn and who we learn it from, how we learn it as the public. What are your thoughts, any of you, on that?
Well, there's no question that once social media started, That was an avenue for some administrations, I think, thought that they didn't need us anymore as reporters, as the intermediary, right? The certainly Premier Houston likes to do, or certainly within his first mandate, liked to do these town halls, which would go out on Facebook, and he'd take questions from constituents and on a variety of topics. But let's not kid ourselves. There was somebody screening those calls, and they knew what the questions would be, and so I think the thought was we no longer need to speak to reporters on this because we have this other these other mechanisms with which to reach our party members and the general public. And I think that changed the dynamic a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Thoughts?
Yes. Yeah. No, I agree. I'll tell you, as you were talking there, I was thinking about when social media first started to be a
thing.
I remember being at a conference, and somebody started to talk about this really neat new app called Twitter. And you know, and its characters. I remember turning to somebody and saying, "That's the stupidest thing I ever saw in my life. That'll never go anywhere." I was like, "Okay, there you know how smart I am." I think back to Barack Obama used social media, and I think was the first official running for office to use social media the way he did. And it was kind of like John F. Kennedy and how he used television way back in the early 60s to get elected. And Barack Obama, you know, was masterful the way he used social media to reach young people and to reach demographics that typically would be very, very difficult to reach. And so that was the first lesson. And then we started to get educated on echo chambers and how echo chambers feed your, you know, the algorithms will feed you. And I remember one time coming to the public administration school and chatting with some of the folks there to say, we should do something jointly about the proliferation of social media and how it is actually informing the electorate about what it is governments do, what they're doing. How, you know, I don't know about this, but I think this is a thing that we should really be studying more deeply. And there was some interest, but then, I don't know, I moved on, other people moved on, we never ever did it. And here we are at a time when I think it's a blessing and a curse. It is used for good and evil. We see it every day. South of the border is the best example of how it's being used. But what I think is that it's really quite scary. I'll tell you a story. My 87-year-old mother lives with me, and she is amazingly adept on social media. She can do more than I can. And some of the things she comes up and says to me that she just read on Twitter or she just read on, Facebook, and I have to tell her that's not real. So when you think about, you know, she's not a slouch. She's a pretty sophisticated, intelligent woman. She still has all her faculties, and that's what worries me. And I worry that without the kind of transparency that we're talking about and the kind of engagement that we're talking about here, we are going to lose a grip on what it really is that we're voting for and what it is that we're supporting. And that really scares me. And so back to your point, Alex, about party discipline, I get that. I understand that. I work in that world. Controlling the narrative, I understand it from a perspective of, not wanting it. You can not shooting everywhere, but being exact with your aim. But I do think that social media really complicates it to the point where sometimes it's chaos and it's toxic, and that just feeds this acrimony, and that's a big problem for us.
I mean, there's so much to be said about it, so I'll try and offer maybe a slightly fresh perspective that goes through my mind quite a bit, and that is the effect of social media on local journalism, and how what is happening is we're in much more of a global information society than we were in the past, and we're going to continue to be. I was saying earlier that it's very hard to predict where things are going, but I use the following as kind of a guidepost for helping me figure out where things are going. The trend that I'm noticing is more and more Canadians getting Canadian news from the New York Times. And I think that's where we're going. And I'm not saying that in any sort of Americanization voice. I think what's happening is that with the direction is we are going to have very well funded, established national and international news outlets that are going to command the bulk of people's attention. And as a result, you're going to have less attention and less accountability at the local level. The more attention that Canadians pay to the bombastic behavior of the American president, the less attention we pay to our own prime minister, our own premier, our own mayor, etc.
To our, if I could,
Yeah,
to our detriment.
to our complete detriment, of course.
I mean, I think, and I'll go one step further and say, I think a lot of young people are getting their news from Stephen Colbert, and getting our news from comedians who are satirizing what's happening, and it's very easy to get sucked into, oh, what is the big orange blob doing today? What outrageous thing has he said now? Much more entertaining than going through budget documents and trying to figure out what's going on in your own country. My concern is, as governments have decided that they don't need us and we're more of an annoyance than a partnership, because there used to be kind of a healthy tug and pull. There used to be a more symbiotic relationship between those of us who covered governments and the politicians we covered. And there was that give and take, and there was background, and there were conversations over here away from the scrums to be able to say, okay, explain to me exactly what's going on. Those conversations are not happening to the regularity that they were. In fact, the last sitting I covered, a lot of the political staff and their young men and women who want to make a name for themselves, and the name of the game is to impress the Premier's office and get their attention, would follow both me and Mike and Keith from Canadian Press and find out who we were talking to, and then kind of report back to the center. And it created what I would deem a toxic environment where there was not that give and take. There wasn't that level of trust that, okay, I can have a conversation with Michael Gorman and he's not going to do a story on it. He's not going to burn me. Like there used to be those off the record conversations. That does not happen to any regularity because we know it'll be reported back to the Premier's office, and you'll end up bounced from cabinet. You'll end up blackballed because, Alex, you would know more about this than I would in terms of your research, this desire or this almost manic need to keep everybody on the blue team, solidly on the blue team, as opposed to the red team or the orange team.
Yeah, in fact, the one positive place where that seems to dissipate is when politicians go on international trips. When they go on international trips, suddenly they're all Canadian.
Right.
And the other thing that politicians tell me is the one place where they really start to get to know each other as humans is actually it's interviews with journalists, but it's not the interviews with journalists. It's when they're in the green room waiting for the interview. And they're sitting around, they have about 10 minutes together. And if they do it enough, they start talking about, well, they have teenagers, or they have somebody as an elderly parent, or they have animals or whatever. And it's when they start having those types of interactions. This is one of the future elements that we have to be concerned about, because remote voting in Parliament, and presumably increasingly that's going to be a norm in legislatures, has all sorts of promising elements to it. It really makes it much more family friendly. It really, there's a lot of good things, but one of the bad things about it is it reduces human interactions. And so you're now a voting machine, just voting the way your party tells you, and you can do it from home. Well, great. But instead of being in the legislature and meeting other people and learning who ministers are and explaining I've got a constituent who has a concern, you just can't do that without those relationships.
I just would make another point to build on this is there was also a day when you had beat reporters. Now we do have the same group that generally covers the legislature in Nova Scotia over a period of time, but there was a day when Pauline, I remember you doing health. I did health. I did the health beat for a while. I did the legislature for a sitting or two. And you developed relationships with the reporters that covered your beat. I remember there was an environment reporter. It was Pam Berman. And so you had developed a relationship, and you could have disagreements, and you could have, debates about approaches or what have you. But you did have those relationships, and they were very important. Newsrooms now are smaller. The economics of it is that people have been laid off. Reporters are expected to do a whole lot more with a whole lot less. Again, chasing multiple stories sometimes. And so those relationships and the time to build those relationships has really diminished to the point where it's actually, I think, hurt those contacts that you would have. And then when you get to social media and you find that, well, look, I can just get right to my audience, it becomes a very performative exercise, doesn't it? When you can just do whatever it is you need to do, get to who you need to get to, and go on to the next day.
I'll just make a quick comment on social media, because I really think journalists have made a grave error with social media. When social media emerged, I think a lot of them thought, well, this is a great way to show my personality, to engage. And I think that's where they started really destroying the trust that people had, because people now started seeing them as people who have opinions and who are biased. And then it becomes very hard to detach from somebody's sort of hard-edged persona online, and then to see them reporting and thinking that they're reporting in an objective manner. And this is great. So there's been public engagement. We have more sense of personalities of certain journalists online, but it's really made the entire profession of journalism come down quite a bit.
I'll go one better. Sorry, Pauline.
They're out of control.
Who would have thought? I think there is a mea culpa for newsrooms to make, and that is at some point there was a straying into, and I remember in Montreal at CJAD, a private radio station, they had a guy named Gord Sinclair who used to go, news and commentary. And so you'd do the news, and he'd do the news, and then he'd add his kind of take on the news. And then we saw that, and we've seen a devolution in the States where people don't know whether or not, they make no distinction between hosts of point of view shows a la Fox and the reporters who work for Fox. It's all blended into one thing, and more you're seeing, even on CNN, you're seeing people having a point of view on what's going on, and people don't make the distinction between, okay, well, they're a host and they're an entertainment show, although it's political entertainment, and the reporters who actually are there to cover. And I think that was we should have stayed in our lane.
So I want to drill down on this a little bit, because there's been some finger wagging about, government and politicians, but as you're suggesting, the media has made some mistakes too in this relationship. And we talk about the media as this, monolithic thing, which it is not. Alex, I want to ask you, when you look at media coverage of politics, where do you see places that journalists don't always get it right?
Well, I'd almost start by saying that, I should throw academics under the bus too, because academics often express their opinions online, and we get the same sort of thing, that sometimes we're moving in the other direction. I really think one of the challenges is, I just have a general view that there is, just building on what you were just saying, there's just way too much opinion out there and not enough facts. And we can, the problem with that is that we can say, well, that's the media's fault, but it's actually our fault because the media is mostly responding to what it is that people want. And something that always, stays with me is the number of journalists have told me about how, I can't remember the term for the software, but they have, maybe somebody here knows, boards that will show in the newsroom which stories are trending and which are getting the most. What's that? Chartbeat. That's it. That's the one. And so when I heard about that about 10 years ago, or whenever it was I first heard about it, I was like, and my wife knows this, I made a personal mission. I will never click on a story that has the word Trump in the headline. And I still stick to that. I still get a lot of it, but I because I know that that's going to add to it.
Right.
And I feel really badly for the people who are doing good investigative journalism, and that's not at the top because the story of a kitten falling downstairs is number one, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah. No question. I think that because ad revenue cratered, because there was this new thing called the internet, and because we were trying to feed an audience, get clicks, we didn't always get it right, 100%. My concern, and I'm going to take it a little in another direction, is, and you talked a little bit about how there used to be a more congenial attitude that people in a house or in Parliament were all there to do a job, and there wasn't it wasn't always just the us them. I think because I think the attitude within the parties became very much, and certainly with governments, and you would probably have some insight on this, it's us against the world, right? We got to fight the opposition. We got to fight reporters. Everyone's trying to tear us down. We're trying to tell our good story, but it's us and them. And it's the animosity that I felt in the later years of and the hostility, frankly, that I felt toward that governments had towards reporters really created that toxicity that I don't know how we get back to something a little saner. And the same thing in the House. At the end of every session, there used to be, the House would close down, everybody would head to Merrill's. The three parties would all kind of share a beer, to talk about, get together and kind of decompress and trade stories and goof around. And people saw each other as human beings as opposed to those bastards who sit across from us who were trying to tear down our government. And that went the way of the dodo. Ernie Fage had a bit to do with that, but that's a whole other story. But after that, you had the parties who beat each other up in the House for 6 weeks, and then they wanted nothing to do with the other side. And they would go, the NDP would go to one bar, the PCs would go to another bar, and the Liberals would go to another bar, and they'd bitch about how stupid the other side was. And I think that's not a healthy place to be. And I think that kind of colors the way the government treats opponents. They don't see them as political rivals. They see them really as the enemy that they must not simply do better than, but to crush. And then all my ideas are brilliant because we're part of the blue team, and all those people are idiots, and we're not going to deal with any idea that doesn't belong to our team.
Laura Lee or Alex, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah. So I just want to go back to, you were talking about the hostility, and I was thinking about this earlier today, and I don't quite know when it developed, but over time, it was this feeling of contempt for one another.
Mm-hmm.
So not just...
That's a better word.
Right? Not just, you were feeling that maybe as though there was contempt, but I can tell you from my experience dealing with senior officials and, elected officials who would, go before the media, that they also felt as though there was contempt. And so this it just was like a cancer, and it just grows. And I would say that, holding the government to account really doesn't mean that they treat it like the enemy. That's, again, that's just the feeling. So there's this, it's really interesting to hear you describe it that way, because I can tell you from standing in a scrum, it's really intimidating. It's really intimidating. You're this close, and you don't know what's going to come at you. And you just said, when we came in here, Jean said, "Oh, I'm used to being on the other side of the microphone, not on this side of the microphone." And I remember when I left the media to go work in government, one of the first times I had to be interviewed. Thank God it was Fons Justin, and I was, I think, shaking. And I had spent so many years doing this job, but I was just realized that I had zero control over what it was, where we were going with this and what he was going to ask me. Now, Fons Justin is a darling of a man.
Dear man.
And was very kind. But I would say that some of the feelings that you experience, and Alex said, put yourself in their shoes. A lot of these folks, get up in the morning and they come to work to do the very best they can for Nova Scotians and Canadians, for that matter. And yet, they're often in very conflicted, complex places where they have to speak to, defend, sell, whatever word you want to use to describe it. And it's really daunting. And so that feeling that you have, it's a shared feeling. And so I think, put that lens on it, and you think, oh God, this person is shaking in their boots.
But my view would be that it comes with the job.
Oh, yeah. I think
If
so.
you don't want to talk to me, as I'm going back to when I was a reporter, you don't want to talk to me, don't run for premier. Because I was the guy who was there, or Mike, or all the other ones.
No,
That was part of the job.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree. What I'm saying is that the feeling of being the enemy is the
Right.
feeling that I think ties people up.
Do you have thoughts on this, Alex?
I was just thinking the comment you said about don't be a premier. So last week I'm working on a project, a couple of projects about researching how is it that as academics we can get better access to politicians.
You want to share that information?
I've done some research about it. Actually, one of the first things that happens is, incidentally, if anyone, they Google you immediately. Like, that shouldn't surprise you, but that's one of the first things that I found out. Anyway, here's the thing that I just thought of, the anecdote. Reached out to, in a provincial legislature, there was a politician, an elected official who has just recently become leader of the party, and took the time to write back and said, this might be the last time I can talk to you. Now that I'm leader of the party, I'm not going to have time to talk to anybody. And actually specifically said, including journalists. And which just really made me, and I think part of it is the reality is that they do work now, politicians, you can compare to the past where you walked in, this sort of thing. I mean, things move fast now.
Mm-hmm.
Things are connected in a way they never were. Departments are connected. Running a government is harder than it ever was before. There are things flying at you. So decisions are expected fast. I once had a deputy minister in Newfoundland explain how things have really evolved. He said, used to be a time that you would say to somebody, if you're upset about something, write a letter.
Mm.
And so you would, it would take time to break out the paper and get it all right. And maybe you'd even have a typewriter and you put a stamp in the mail and to walk to the post office. I mean, the whole time you're thinking about it, right? And you got to wait and wait, and maybe you might get a reply at some point, or possibly you write a letter and it gets published in a letter to the editor or whatever the case may be. And then now people have phones, and they send a message to a representative. They're like, it's been an hour. I mean, what's the matter with that person? And not realizing the volume of messages that people are getting. And so I think for me, a lot of it is just also bearing in mind that it is really, really hard to be in a government these days. It's really hard to be a politician. But frankly, it's also hard to be a journalist. I mean, what you're just saying about filing, it's not, you are filing for the web, you are filing for possibly TV, you might have multiple stories, and you sometimes are doing this on your own. It used to be that you would maybe have two people come with you, with lighting and a camera, and you might have had a microphone. And instead, now often a journalist will show up and it's handheld, and they're having to do it like this the whole time. And they're expected to file very fast because there's this constant competition that's going on. So the world is moving at a faster pace. And when the world moves at a faster pace, there are going to be changes. The challenge I think that we have as a society is try to figure out what do we do about this? Where do we go with this? Because we haven't even mentioned TikTok, but that's an example of where people are getting their information.
Right. But here's my frustration, or what used to be my frustration before I retired, because, of course, I don't care about this stuff anymore. Sure, it's complex, it's not easy to understand or digest or sell or whatever adjective you want to use. Then why aren't they talking more and spending more time, taking time with journalists to say, here's where we're going, here's the background, here's why it's so complex, instead of sending out a bullshitty two paragraph thing talking about nothing. That says nothing. That's
because you don't have the audience that you used to have.
And
so that's the problem. So as a result, from their point of view, you don't matter the way that you used to.
Oh, I can tell that everybody's feeling this. Yeah.
A lot of big feels up here, folks.
Yeah. So I want to pick up on something that Alex said that was, how there's more opinion and not enough facts.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a renewed Freedom of Information piece of legislation that will come into effect in April. Talk to me, whoever would like to start, about what will this mean for the, I see people in this audience who use freedom of information.
Can I phone
all
a friend?
the time.
Because he's right. Mike submitted to the committee that was looking at the changes and did so in a very thoughtful way, and so did Canadian Press and some of my other colleagues. Yeah, I'm not sure it's going to make a damn bit of difference. Because it's the way they apply the law, and I'm looking over at Carla Heggie, who used to be a Freedom of Information officer for the Labor Department, and is an expert in this field, and you should weigh in when it comes time.
I can tell we need to leave a lot of time for comments.
It's the way they apply the law. The law is written a certain way, but it's being administered a certain way, and I can tell you, I stopped using FOIPOP because it just was an exercise in frustration, and it took forever to get anything. And what you got was next to useless. But I had colleagues who were much more successful than I did. I just gave up because I was tired of beating my head to a bloody pulp.
Yeah, I mean, the act hadn't been looked at, I don't think, since... I'm going to get the year wrong, but the mid-90s was the last time that act, I mean, so it didn't even address things like social media or texting or, other ways that you might be interested in getting information. And so it was, it was on the stove for a very long time. I would say that because of the imperfections, the way that, whoever was interpreting what it meant, and most of the time it's the folks that are doing, freedom of information officers and departments. And, they're trained to actually err on the side of giving the information. And sometimes what would hold that up, and I can say this honestly because I would have to go through a lot of them, were thousands of pages sometimes, and the deputy has to sign off, so you'd have to go through and see what's there, and it would sit on a desk. I would try to do it as quickly as I could because by the time it got to me, you were probably within your 30 days. So the new act, I didn't read the act. I'm not there anymore either, but I think it was intended to address some of the things, some of the imperfections, but you would know better than I how it's going to best serve you.
I guess the thing is that the commissioner will still not have the ability to require...
The commissioner, no. No.
Yeah. How important is that? If you're not able to talk to people to get information, how important is the Freedom of Information legislation for journalists and others who are looking for facts?
It protects those who are not giving us the facts. That's what it does. It's a protection mechanism.
So I think for anybody, I've used freedom of information in my research. I've used it across the country. I find it incredibly helpful, incredibly useful, and I try to encourage students to use it sometimes. It's important for people to realize that freedom of information is meant to be about generating records that already exist, that you are not somehow hiring public servants to go out and do research for you and dig things up. And so the faster they can find something within a defined period of time, you have to provide very clear instructions. The comment that I would simply make about it is when I've, in some research I've done, I've asked every single department in every provincial government for the exact same specific piece of information. And you can be treated incredibly different in the exact same province, depending on who you happen to land on. And sometimes I've had people say, oh, well, you're doing academic research. We will give this as much as you want and we'll help you and we'll give it all to you for free. And then you'll hit another department and they'll say, well, that's $5,000. And, I'm sorry, it's going to take 7 years. And it's just,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Attach your name to a news outlet and see how much faster that is.
The other thing is that we've been talking largely about provincial politics and provincial government. What do we think about the access to information and sort of accessibility of municipal and federal governments? I know, Alex, a lot of your research is on federal politics.
Yeah. And maybe I'll turn to Laura in a minute, given your current role. I think one thing that's interesting is that there was a period of time at the federal level where there was this buzzword of open government. And the idea was that government was going to be transparent and open by default, and that things would be available. And it just seems like over time, for whatever reason, that spirit has kind of fallen to the wayside. And I can't say from my perspective that if, there's a lot of things that I think in a society we have to pick and choose on what it is that is worth standing up for. In my opinion, freedom of information is an important one to take a stand on.
Yeah, I don't disagree because, well, for the same reason we're here tonight talking about the access of journalists to those who lead us, those who are elected and lead us. And we haven't yet talked about, some of the bureaucrats that get cornered and what that does to them and the actual fear that comes into their souls when they have to go into a scrum. But I would say that people need information, good information, accurate information, so that they understand what it is they either believe or don't believe, support or don't support. And so we have this chill. It is almost like this feedback loop because there's a bit of a feeling of contempt, to use the word that I used earlier. So there's a bit of a chill on going before the media. So there's
legislature
silence.
Committees
And then there's silence, and the silence feeds the contempt, and then so it just unravels, and so people are really left only with whatever it is they have, which are the echo chambers on social media. So it's very, very important, I think, that there is some pathway to information. And freedom of information is one. And for a long time, we knew that the act was flawed and had to be dealt with. And so I'm glad it was dealt with. But I must now go look to see just how it was dealt with.
I'm going to step out of my old crotchety reporter body and say that the province does deserve credit for the fact that deputy ministers still make themselves available to reporters after they testify before, unless that's changed. No. Okay. And by and large, after they are questioned for 2 hours by the politicians in committee, they have been making themselves available to reporters to answer supplementary questions. So they deserve at least kudos for that. And I don't blame bureaucrats at all for any of this. I think it's the concentration of power within the center that is dictating how much information goes out the door and the quality of that information. I think I may have mentioned before the budget documents we used to get back in the olden days was about this much. It's down to, what is it, about 2 inches now, 3 inches. The supplementary estimates, which is the nitty gritty of line by line where the government spends in each department, has gotten vaguer and vaguer and vaguer. And although there's 40 hours of debate during the budget making process, the kind of back and forth and questioning of the opposition members to cabinet ministers about their budget has become really an exercise in futility. There was, I can't remember who was in power at the time, but it became, because the minister has an hour's worth of time to explain their estimates, they would take up the entire hour just talking about every single program that they were funding in minute detail, just to eat up their hour of the 40 hours allotted for debate on the estimates. And that has loosened a little bit. And it really depends on the minister whether or not they're going to answer specific questions from opposition. But it used to be so much better, and there was actually information being provided during that debate. A lot less so today. You're really having to sift through a lot of gravel to find a nugget.
So we have spent about 70 minutes sort of picking through the problems, and that's important. But I want to save some time to say, how do we make this better? How do we sort of get over that contempt and bridge this gap? Because I think people would see that as important.
I'm going to go to what Alex talked about, and that is interpersonal relationships. The more individuals meet with other individuals and realize, oh, just because you're a New Democrat doesn't mean you're the dumbest thing since toast. The same way I get into conversations with politicians, and I tried to make time to talk about anything but politics, just so we got to know one another a little bit. You build these relationships, and they would look at me and go, oh, geez, you're not the arsehole they told me you were. You're not that bad. You're an actual human being. And it's about kind of creating those situations so that they do we see each other as real, live, living, breathing human beings with, whatever problems going on at home or whatever. And the more that we can break down these artificial partisan the barriers that they put up between the parties, saying, because I'm in government, I'm always right. Because you're in opposition, you're always wrong. Because you're a reporter, you're trying to get me. It's always about you're trying to screw me somehow and make me lose my job and look bad. I don't think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I had a pretty good reputation within the bureaucracy that I was trying to better understand. Going back to the mission statement of CNS, I was trying to explain what your government was doing and why. And my ethos during my 30 years at Province House was really to be able to properly explain what was going on, why it was going on, and the context by which it was going on. And that's what I think, that was what I brought to the table. And I think the more you can build that trust, although I don't know whether it's possible to rebuild that kind of trust.
So, Lorley, from your perspective, how would journalists approach government to say, "Hey, let's have a real conversation here," and it matters?
Fix it.
Please.
Well, I do think it comes down to relationships, because that's what we're all wired in ways that we're emotional beings. And I remember back in the early days of Communications Nova Scotia, you were the president of the press gallery, and we would meet a couple of times a year, maybe 3 or 4, where grievances could be aired. We could have a decent conversation, a cup of coffee, and it was like, hello, Ralph, hello, Sam. So we would have really good conversations.
4 people in this room got that.
Yes, yeah.
And they're all as old as we are.
There you go. So, I think that really helped us, because, I could take the things that were, and those that came behind me, could take the things that the media and the press gallery were finding to be frustrations, and bring everyone together, and we could talk about it, like how long it took to call back. Well, let's put a standard in place. If you can't call back within a certain time frame, you can at least call back and say, look, I don't have the information yet, Jean, but I'll I'm working on it.
Mm-hmm.
And so those kinds of things. And then I could say to you, look, you guys are getting too close with those scrubs. So we did have that relationship. But aside from just that, it's the personal relationships that you can build with those who are elected. I can think of, in long-term senior bureaucrats, I can think of Paul LaFleche is the guy I think about, who everybody knows, and he's been around for a very long time. But he's a guy who's there to help. He shows up every day to make a difference, and he's been a senior deputy. I think he's one of the longest-serving deputy ministers in the provincial government. But you all probably know him as somebody who would, if I don't have the answer, I'm going to get it for you. I get you the information, or I'm going to tell you that I can't get that information for you. I don't have it. So, to your question, Pauline, around how I do think that we need to be bold enough, perhaps, to say, let's have a conversation and see if there's something we can't do to maybe make some difference here. But I also do agree, and I'm sorry to say this with Alex, I do agree that where the audience is where they're going to go.
Right.
And so, we've seen what happened to our local newspapers. I remember the luxurious days when we had the Daily News and the Chronicle Herald and others that community newspapers that came up around, and they were thick and they provided you with news. And here we are.
Yeah. They were bigger than the Sobeys flyer.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. So relationships are important, and I think trying to reestablish some form of trust, and I guess that goes with getting over some of the acrimony. I don't know if it's possible.
Counseling? Couples counseling?
What I was going to say was I don't know if it's possible to back up.
We're going to come to...
Yeah.
You know the history of that? It started off as a press club, and Victor Zipperek and John Howard, Chris Morris, and I got together and we said, hey, we got to have what you guys are talking about. And one of us had just been over to Japan doing a business deal, and he said, yeah, you know what they do over there? They don't make any deals with anybody about anything until they get drunk together, because drunks can't remember the lies they tell, so they have to tell the truth. I said, Jesus, you're the decay president. I said, okay, let's have a place where politicians, people in the arts, and the media especially, right there, right at the end of the city square. That was the press club, and it worked fantastic. A lot of good stuff happened in there because people were just sitting around, relaxed, having a bit of fun, and they weren't bullshit each other because they know they'd be caught out on their lies. And we started to get really into good relationships between the Fourth Estate and the publicly elected representatives of the public. It worked. Why don't we do that still?
I think because we have cell phones.
Yeah.
Where you can,
Yeah.
Oh, so maybe it's anti-social media.
I want Alex to weigh in on this.
So I have two. I mean, there's a long list of things that we could come up with. I have two. I think number one, we should start by electing more women. A a lot of these things are systems, and I'm not saying this to be politically correct. I'm saying it as a fact. These are systems that were designed by men, and men are inherently more combative. And women, we know through research, are far more likely to try to work out problems by talking about them. But for whatever reason, as a society, we don't elect more women. It's very slow in terms of progress. I think a lot of us are waiting for a woman to be Premier of Nova Scotia. I'm waiting for a woman to be leader of the Liberal Party of Canada that often portends that it's a feminist party. There are a lot of systems in this society that are very male structured. And so that's one thing that over time will presumably evolve in that direction. The second thing is, I think that as a society, we need to demand more, and this won't surprise you given that I'm an academic, but we need to demand more from education, from the K-12 system into post-secondary about civic literacy and information literacy.
100%. 100%.
You know, where do you find time for that? Because that means taking away other things. My dad was an English teacher, and I used to always bug him, why do we have to learn Shakespeare every single year? There has to be room for these sorts of things. Financial literacy is probably another one. So I think there are things that can be done, but one of the things that ultimately it comes down to is who is going to do it? And for anybody in this room who has ever thought about running for office, start thinking about it more. Start affecting change. Don't just think it's somebody else. Get involved in a local group. Get involved in a political party. Do something. Because it's important that if you care about these values, that you take it upon yourself to try to do something about it.
And can I just add to that? So if you think that it's important that reporters have greater access to the politicians who you've elected to govern, and not just every 4 years, 3 or 4 years. My challenge to you is along the same lines, and that is put pressure on your MLA, put pressure on your municipal councillor, put pressure on your MP to do better. Tell them it's not good enough. You shouldn't be stonewalling. You shouldn't be issuing shitty two-line responses to reporters. You should be talking to them. You should be explaining what you're doing, why you're doing it, and providing the evidence for some of the decisions you're making. And we've deputized reporters to do that on our behalf. Because it ain't going to change if there isn't political pressure at premiers' offices, at PMOs, to make this an important issue. Because, spoiler alert, they're not listening to me.
I just want to acknowledge that Jean has not dropped a single F-bomb all night. Hello.
Good man.
I was told to be on my best behavior.
So I can tell that there are probably questions and comments in the room. There are 2 people who are going to have microphones and make their way around. So you just have to put your hand up nice and high and wave it around. And, okay. So Katie, right here.
Hello, I'm the aforementioned Carla Heggie. I've been in the field of information access and privacy for 38 years. I've written the legislation. Literally, it was reviewed by us every 5 years, recommendations to Cabinet, to the Centre, not listened to. So don't blame the bureaucrats or the experts. I left 10 years ago from government because of what we've been talking about tonight. Prior to that, I worked with reporters, especially investigative reporters. It's a great tool for investigative reporters. Freedom of information. I'm going to nearly drop his F-bomb. Freedom of information is a quasi-constitutional right in Canada and in Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia had the first information access legislation in the world. 1972 it was written, 74 it became into effect. Most people don't know that. I also teach it at Dalhousie, but information access and privacy. The thing is, the act works, but it's been muzzled. I left government for a reason, and one of the first reasons was I was pulled in and reprimanded. As a senior head of a public body under the Act, I was reprimanded by a director of communications because I was caught having a coffee and talking to that journalist up there. And I thought, do I want to do that? No, I'll do it from outside. But the act works. Don't blame the FOIPOP Act. Most people will say, oh, FOIPOP, no, that's terrible. It's not. It's a damn good act. People just don't know how to use it properly. Ask for the information. Work with the person. If Fred's still in the room?
Yep.
Fred's still in the room. Get me into King's journalism, talking to guest lectures with your students. I'd love to do it. I'll teach you how to use the damn act.
Thank you.
No.
Hi. I've got to say I'm really happy to see this happen. My name is Michelle Raymond. My parents were both journalists back in the 50s and 60s before they came to Nova Scotia. So I had that background and that knowledge. I served for 3 terms in the provincial legislature, and I think I might be able to cast a little bit of light on that animosity. One of the first things that I was told when I was first elected, and I had not been involved in the political process before running for office for the Assembly, one of the first things that I was told was, you have to remember that your only friends are in this room. Mm. And that makes people scared. Mm-hmm. It terrifies them. And I think it sets up a dynamic by which people are prepared to do anything and everything to keep themselves in that safe place where they won't be thrown out to the dogs, and the dogs are everybody else outside. So that's one thing which I think really is, it's a piece of indoctrination, which I'm sure still happens, and it needs to be resisted. It took me a year or two to figure out that that's just plain not true. There's a life before and there's a life after. And just like being a parent, the time that you're in the legislature should be the time which is a period in your life, or in any lawmaking body. It is a period in your life. But your time as a journalist, and your time as a citizen, and your time as a human being is everything from birth to death. And when Alex talks about education, it's not just civic education. I always talk about the because I said so school of child rearing and the damage that it does. When a child comes to you, or when you went to your parents and said, why does such and such, or why do I have to such and such? And somebody says, well, because I said so. Mm. That's what they learn. They learn then and there. And that's a world which people perpetuate that. And we really need an education system, and we need a cultural system which encourages people to take the time to answer questions, to ask questions, to answer them, to believe that everybody actually deserves that much. And that's how people treat other people better. And that's how politicians also learn to resist that because I said so. And your only friends are who I tell you your only friends are, because it's quite simply not true. And people need to learn the courage to resist that. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I saw quite early was, I don't know how many people here realize that, into the 16th century, people publishing broadsheets were imprisoned for publishing accounts of what took place in Parliament at Westminster. They would go to prison for that. And frankly, that was resisted, and eventually Parliament had to give up and stop imprisoning people in Parliament for publishing accounts of what took place in there. More recently, we had television come in and everything else. But what has happened is I think that media are part of this as well as everybody else, which is that the bon mot, the piece of entertainment, has taken over from the thoughtful response. And so the person who can deliver the soundbite is often the most successful politician. And we're seeing what happens when you elect people who deliver masterful sound bites, but nothing else. I won't take up a whole lot longer, but I will say I've been working with the Freedom of Information process a lot since leaving the legislature, working on seeking a single piece of information, which certainly exists but hasn't been divulged. And it's a real problem, again, this sense of when we say no, we say no. And if people are going to allow themselves to be ghosted, I know that the media don't have the time to undertake huge campaigns on freedom of information. But if people won't talk to you, if individual elected people who are elected to talk to people will not speak, then the freedom of information process needs to stand in. And I would say that this is a place where journalists and people in general need to coordinate work in the freedom of information system. Stuff gets done redundantly all the time. And I think it would be really good if we had a place, for instance, where individuals register their requests. I suspect most people asking questions don't really want their anonymity protected. It might be a useful thing to do. It would be a central registry of requests made and the fact that answers have been delivered. And I think I better let you. I'll just one last thing. When people talk about here's the news, we always used to say here's the news. Now I hear people saying here's your news. The news is the same for everybody. So I'll leave it at that.
It's nice to see you, Michelle. One of the things that's interesting, and I know people are saying, oh, he's bashing the blue team, he's bashing. Anyway, the long and short of it is you were part of a government that there was a real sea change that I noticed anyway, that the Dexter government really tried to there was much greater control after they came to power, and that's when this devolution, in my mind, really started to speed up. And I think they changed the mission of CNS to more of a focus on marketing as opposed to providing information. And this is not a partisan issue. The NDP did it. The two liberal premiers did it, and now this. Houston government is doing it, and it really is. Every time they tighten these things or get rid of things like we used to find out what the premier was doing. We used to have a précis of his agenda, the week at a glance. The Liberals got rid of it. This government promised to bring it back, didn't. It's never coming back because as one government changes the rules of the road, that becomes the new bottom for where we're going. And so the danger is always, as things devolve, getting them back to where we were. There's almost no road back to the future, if you will.
Mm-hmm. I was just thinking, I don't even know why this popped into my mind as you were talking about, your only friends are the people that are in this room. During the COVID pandemic, Dr. Strang, who was in every single day, made himself available, and had to take some pretty tough decisions. And not everybody agreed with his decisions, and some people thought he didn't go far enough. But I know because I was working every day. We worked 7 days a week. Our first meetings were in the mornings at 7:30, 8 o'clock. What was going to happen today? What the numbers were, so on and so forth. And when it came to the time that people were getting pretty fed up with masks and bubbles and all of those kinds of things. There were people that went to his home,
Right.
and it was a very, very terrifying experience for his family, for him, his son, his wife, his daughter. And I remember thinking about, I'm not blaming the media on this at all. It's about the information that went out there and his availability on social media and how that drew people to come to express themselves at his place. This kind of thing is at the heart of what we're talking about. The kind of fear that they're not your friend, they're not on your team. These guys are stupid. I know the answers. All those kinds of things. Those are the narratives that got us to where we are, I think, in terms of who can I trust? Because yes, there's an erosion of trust.
Mm-hmm.
We have then the shrinking newsroom, right?
Mm-hmm.
So all of these things have come to play. It's a very, very complex narrative around why it is we are here.
100%.
But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't try, I think, to have the kinds of conversations that might change things.
I will say just one last thing on social media, which is that my tenure, as Jean says, there was a sea change, and the sea change was the real development of social media. I just said, I don't have enough neurons to have that many communications vectors. I'm going to keep it real simple, and I'm glad I did.
I lost many neurons because of Twitter.
Yeah. We have a question
Alex,
over
did you
here.
have it?
Oh, sorry,
Oh,
Alex.
it's okay. I'll pass along a quick anecdote that I was just thinking about, and I've had several people tell me this, politicians and political staff. If you are an elected official, you start getting a job as a political staffer, it's not uncommon that you will get a call from somebody telling you to unlike something that you liked on social media. And they'll be saying, why did you like that? And they were particularly sensitive if you happen to like something that somebody from another political party put online, because then that can cause criticism. So if you just think about what that does very early on, you're essentially being told off by liking something that you agreed with just because somebody else on the other team put it out there. That kind of tells you a lot about all the problems that we have in our political system today.
And Nancy, an old boss of mine, is sitting here too, and she would know better than I. There are very strict rules within the CBC about how journalists are to interact on their social media feeds, and what you can like, what you can't like, what you can say, opinions you can express. You're not supposed to express any opinions, which is why it's been so liberating to retire. I have found opinions.
Yeah, I'd like to.
Who knew?
I'd like to direct a question to all three of you. We're in a place where we teach journalism, and I'd like to hear from you, wishing to be journalists, what you think about where you're going to work, and who you're going to work for, and what you should know, other than simply journalism, to get those jobs. We recently heard a guy named Elon Musk say, without his money buying the White House from Trump, he wouldn't exist anymore as the renegade that he is. And I wasn't sure if he was talking about himself or Trump. But the thing is, ownership and control of information has always been a power source. It goes all the way back through many generations. I would like, if you, for example, John, if you were to do an in-depth, what's your name again?
Alex?
Laureline.
Yeah, if either of you were to do a really deep couple-of-year research project on the interconnectedness of ownership between political parties and forestry companies and all the media silos. Joe Roplack did this with the Pugwash Conference, and I'm an associate of here at Dell a few years back. He worked on the Manhattan Project with Einstein, and he founded the Pugwash Conference. The thing is, the deeper you look, the same names keep coming up through the generations of families and corporations who own and control most of the world we're trying to have a democracy within. And a lot of our young people here are going to want to try to find a place to be doing the right job that we're talking about, keeping democracy and civil society alive.
So you have a question you want the students to answer?
I would like the students to say what's on their mind. I'll gladly hand this over.
Why don't you pass that to Jenna? Sure. Right in front of you. Yes, thank you.
Sorry, what exactly is your question? Like where we want to work? Oh boy. Well, I've never been shy. I think many of my teachers can attest to that. Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. Sorry, I was put a little bit on the spot here. I know we heard a lot about freedom of information legislation. Jean, I would be interested to know why you don't feel like what roadblocks you faced in your career that made you feel like it wasn't helpful.
There are 24 hours in a day. I worked good 10 hours most days, and I just didn't see the bang for the buck. And different, my colleagues probably have a different view on things, but I just thought if I'm going to use my energy, it's not going to be doing FOI pops. I did for a long time, and then I just got disillusioned and cynical and bitter and decided the better use of my time would be to kind of cultivate the kind of contacts that I have and work that part of my skill set as opposed, I was never really great at filing FOI pops anyway. And the kind of information, I didn't have the kind of the analytical mind to be able to kind of go through thousands of pages of stuff looking for news. My colleagues who were sitting in front of me were much better at it and had a greater capacity for it. I just got fed up and said, screw it. It's just a lot of work that I don't want to do. And I think I can do better work doing something else. So that was very personal.
Don't be discouraged, Jenna.
No. Go ahead. If you can do it, man, more power to you. I gave up.
Tim Bousquet has the mic.
I wish I had a better answer for that, but yeah.
Does this?
No, Jesus.
I'll find some happy medium here. Tim Bousquet, publisher of the Halifax Examiner. I just want to gently push back a bit on the disdain I heard for opinionized news. I came of age as a reporter in a world of lefty news organizations and alt weeklies, and I think both of those, there's some overlap there, brought a lot to journalism that was missing, especially on the local level with alt weeklies, and I like to think that my own contributions at alt weeklies were significant. I think, and from that time, I was in my 20s in the Reagan and Thatcher years. We've seen our society go one direction towards now fascist regimes and increased inequality and extreme wealth at the end. And through that process, the mainstream media has failed. It's taken several different ways. One is taken this voice from nowhere kind of, the man from Mars comes to Earth and reports dispassionately on what's happening. There's been consolidation, increase, the kinds of controls John just said on reporters about they can't be humans. And all the while, some of the biggest, the very fact of the increased authoritarianism was never commented on. Climate change was missed as a news story for decades and decades, and still the mainstream media is failing on it. The control of multinational corporations and the very wealthy on our society is dehumanizing. And I think it's important for journalists to call bullshit, to point out the facts of the world. And yes, that's opinionized. Yes, we're human. And, deal with it. I think that we're now doing a multi-part series on artificial intelligence, which is, at its heart, a dehumanizing project. And I think we need humans at the table standing up for humans, talking about the value of life and social good, and standing up for people. And that means to be opinionized.
So what's your question?
There was the opportunity was for some comment, and I just wanted I wanted to comment on that.
Yeah.
No, look, I agree with you, and that's why I admire what you're doing and what others are doing online, and the multiplicity of voices. Are you suggesting? I'm trying to wrap my head around what you're suggesting. I mean, you have, and your publication has a voice and a point of view, and it's totally legit. I don't disagree with you on that.
I'll speak loudly because it might speak, but it was said that we should just be saying the facts, and we shouldn't be having an opinion there. We should.
I think there's room for opinion, and there are opinion shows. I wouldn't do it in the body of the news the way you do it. I think you're right. There is kind of room for righteous outrage at what was it that what's his name Rick Howe used to say, if you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. Yeah, there's still some of that fire in most of the journalists I know, but I think that the blending of fact and opinion, I think, has alienated some of the people that Laura Lee has talked about. Like it's muddied the waters in some way. But I think if you're up front and say, this is who we are as a publication and we will take a point of view, good on you, people understand that. I just think you have to delineate between here's the news as factually and as neutrally as you can present it, and here's commentary on that.
So this was Alex's comment. Facts, not opinion. Do you want to reply?
Yeah, I'll just clarify that if you want to provide a media outlet that provides opinion, clearly label it as such. That's all we're asking for. And journalists who are providing us with information and facts, clearly label it that way, but don't inject opinion into something that we are led to believe is necessarily straightforward facts.
And I'm not in any way delegitimizing what you do. I agree that you should have a voice at the table. It's just going to be a little different than the voice I had at the table. And what I think I brought to the table was context and a kind of a longer view, and try to present it in a way that people could see the logic of what I was putting forward and be able to say, this is what they've done. This is why I believe they've done it. And this is the kind of the history leading up to it, because every government likes to pretend like their idea is brand new and no one's ever thought of it. And it's the most brilliant thing that this province has ever done, right? Oil was going to save us. Natural gas was going to save us. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, we have a question here and then a question up above.
It's as much as a comment, more of a comment and a enforcement of what Michelle had to say. Hi, Michelle, Kate Graves. Last night I got to hear Jennifer Fraser, the author of The Gaslit Brain, protect your brain from lies, bullies, gaslighting, and institutional complicity, which I think is what we're talking about here. So really the nut of it was exactly what Michelle had to say. You're doing it because I say so. And that is abuse culture. She names it as such because what she has found through the research, PhD, she's PhD in literature, but she's using neuroscience to inform this research, this book. And she defines gaslighting as a driver of disorientation and mistrust. Gaslight is the act of practicing or practice of grossly misleading someone, especially for one's own advantage. Negligence is covered up, and what you're describing is negligence. These self-serving lies have to stop, and what it stops in us is our amygdala from firing. This is damage. This is abuse. It shuts down your brain, okay? It makes mush of your brain. And that's the neuroscience research that she has used to inform here.
And frankly, we're seeing that in spades south of the border, right?
Yes, exactly, exactly.
Part of their
and actually, she had 82 pages of her book deleted to protect that very story from being. Okay, so the damage to the brain, I won't go through there, but to answer, where do we go with this? She's identified 10 steps as ways to not refurbish, but reignite the neuroplasticity of our brains after we've gone through this. So I just would like to say again, the name of the book is The Gaslit Brain, and it's written by Dr. Jennifer Fraser. She had to go through a whistleblowing experience, as did I. That's why it sort of resonated. And you keep asking, well, why doesn't this happen, or why don't we do this? But once the brain is shut down in any particular way, you can't access it. And when we don't have the language, when you're told from being a child, do it as I say, you don't have the language to explain what's happening to you or to even look for what's happening to us. So this is this is abuse culture, is what we've identified here. And as a former teacher or a retired teacher, I think that the steps that she identifies, the 10 different ways that you can rebalance your brain, need to be considered in the school system. It's not that civic education hasn't been taught. You teach it in grade 8. It's taught in this province. It might not always.
I heard some of that interview. It was really good.
It was an excellent interview, but she was at St. FX last night, and I caught that question. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. We have there's a question up here. The hand's been up on and off. Yeah.
Let's go to a student.
And I'll just say we only have a few minutes left if people can keep it tight.
No pressure.
Hi. Lovely panel. Happy to be here. Thank you guys so much for your insight. I'm going to be a little self-indulgent here. My research is on how politicians present themselves through visuals, particularly on social media. And Dr. Marlin kind of spoke a little bit towards the framing of images with words on podiums and things like that. But Laura, my question is directed particularly to you because I think your experience in comms might speak to what it was like for politicians to prepare to be photographed and the shaping of images prior to social media and how we might see a change in that. Or Jean, if you have any insight in that as well, as a journalist, perhaps on the other side of those things. I was just kind of curious about how photographing a politician looked like prior to the age of social media.
Mm-hmm. That's a very good question, and it might surprise you to know that there was no preparation. We just used to say to them, don't close your eyes, but no, I'm not kidding. There was literally no prep. Now, what we would do, and I'm sure most of you know this, is that if there was a big news conference coming, we would sit in the room and run through potential questions so that they could practice a little bit. And in particular, if it was going to be on television or radio, we would want them to not repeat themselves or not go back to, like, as I said before, remember that, you just, every time is an opportunity to get the fresh information out there. But that would be, in the olden days, the extent of the preparation that we would do. I would say that it could be different now, but when I was CEO of Communications Nova Scotia, what we did have was we had some staff photographers who actually, they all came from the Chronicle Herald, I think.
Right.
And they did a lot of stock imaging of ministers and various others, and that was made available as much as possible. But if I was really surprised to hear you say about the signs. I mean, I know we've put signs and banners up all the time, but we weren't thinking about the message as much as we were thinking about getting something interesting in the photograph. I know. It's not a very sexy answer.
But that must have started during election campaigns, right? And then that kind of evolved through government announcements?
Yeah, there's a lot of, in fact, through the access information, I've received diagrams that show where the Prime Minister is going to be situated. And so they have what they call tour advance. Some of you may be aware of this. And so people will show, before Mark Carney is giving a speech somewhere, somebody has scouted the locations 2 weeks ahead of time. And that person's job is to figure out, okay, this is the right location. This is where we're going to pen all the journalists so that we can get the exact camera shot we're looking for. This is where the podium's going to be. This is where all the people behind him are going to be nodding, appreciating, clapping, and saying absolutely nothing.
Right.
And to get the exact images that they want with, and also like even the Canadian flags, they have them ironed. They have little rods in them to make sure if you look at a Canadian flag, it's never limp. It's always kind of standing out like this, and they actually have proper wire frames to hold them out. I mean, all of these things are now done because the image matters more than it used to.
Which is why they end up having an audience in back. The Americans kind of perfected that, where you have, the guy with the hard hat. Okay, we've got the nurse looking nursely, and then you've got, let's pick out the demographics, and we need, somebody of color over here. We need an older woman here, and they very much stage manage that stuff. A funny story. Do I have time?
Keep it short, Sean. We got questions.
Okay, no, let's go to the question. Ask me about that story, and I'll give to you after.
Good evening. Thank you for the interesting and important lecture. I'll get to this relatively quickly, but it does require a short prelude. I'm the Senior Public Affairs Officer at the 5th Canadian Division here in Halifax, and I've been here for about 2 years. I was also a J School grad here in 2002, so it's nice to be back. When I got here, I was talking with my general, and I said, what do you want to do in your 2 years that you have as a term as the commander here? And he wanted to get on the road and recruiting and all the standard things that an Army general is going to want to do. And I had this idea that we would go out and we'd talk to all the university radio stations, because that's where there's a lot of smart people that we want to recruit.
Right.
So I pitched this out in an email, and I really got about 1 to 2 responses. There was only one radio station that took us up. And it wasn't caged. It said, you can have a conversation about anything you want. Half an hour, 45 minutes. He's in your town. What would you like to do? So it was only Fredericton, it was only UNB that took us up. And I thought, that's weird. So I called one of the big 3 radio stations here in Halifax. And I offered the same thing to the programs that I listened to. And I got a response from one of them that said, oh, that's interesting, I'll talk to my producer. The other one didn't respond at all. And having done this for 20 years, I thought that's kind of strange, because most people would jump at the chance to have an open-ended conversation with a senior Army officer for the region. And I don't know if it's fear or maybe it's apathy, but I can't figure it out. And I don't know if something has changed with, it's almost a counterpoint to what you have talked about tonight. And it has me very curious. So if you have any thoughts on that, I'd be interested to know.
Yeesh. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the one of the largest employers in this province is DND, and so I can't understand why somebody wouldn't want to jump at that opportunity if it's if the rules of engagement were asked me anything, other than there's 1,001 things that we're juggling. Chainsaws every day. These are people, because I've done some hosting and tried to kind of line up guests for programs that I would have hosted. I would have jumped at that opportunity. The only thing I can think of is that there are fewer and fewer people who have time to sit down and go, okay, if we get a general in, what the hell are we going to ask him, or whatever. Yeah, I'm just as flummoxed as you are as to why somebody wouldn't take you up on that. Part of it is the pitch. You can't just say, I've got a general, ask him anything. Maybe it's kind of, you got to, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. I
So-
don't have a good answer for that.
Sorry, Jean. I keep stepping on you. We have come to the end of our time, and I can see there are still other questions, and I'm sorry we're not getting to them. And I thank you for being here and bringing those questions. I also want to thank our panelists for being part of this conversation. Laura Lee, Jean, Alex, much appreciation to you.